Hello, welcome.
Hello and welcome to the Wonkette live chat.
Yes, Robyn has graciously agreed to pre-record this because I am either in California or my plane did not arrive. Uh, it's always weird to pre-record things and like it would be
Yeah,
very sad. I'm sure if my
I mean,
plane didn't
because
arrive,
we don't know, like something completely insane could happen, and it'll look like we're just like absolutely ignoring that, like a bunch of psychopaths, So I did want to be clear about that in case the world does blow up.
that we're completely oblivious, like if something
Yeah,
terrible happened.
like what's wrong with these people? Also, you guys get to be treated to my unstraightened hair, which is a horrifying nightmare because I just got finished writing for the day. So
I think
that's exciting.
I think it looks great. I stand behind it. So,
It's
slightly.
one thing if I have time to like scrunch and actually do something to it. This is just like I'm a poof ball. A
Um,
Furby or something.
and I swear we'll get to politics eventually, but I think this will somehow swerve to politics. But
We'll
you and
figure something out.
I, well, eventually when we get to the TV show, but we were talking about this week. So the Barbra Streisand, who I'm a big fan of, you as well, turned
Yes.
80. On her 80th birthday, I think was the premiere of the Funny Girl revival, which has never, I mean, I don't think it's ever been revived
No,
since.
it has not.
Um, and the review, I admit, as a big fan of Streisand, that I was not particularly. I had major issues with this whole concept.
Yeah, we've been talking about this for a long time, Stephen and I, because both of us were kind of like, we want it to be good, but it's probably not gonna be good.
Yeah, and if I could break down, so some of my issues, I'll get to the show, like why you're reviving the show in the first place. But with the casting, there was some controversy. It was something that everyone thought that Lea Michele, who was on Glee, for those of you who watched that show, she was very big on wanting to do this and didn't get it. And I don't know, or I've forgotten if there was any sort of drama behind why she was not chosen.
Oh, there is, yeah, there's actually a lot of drama. It came out, it had been out for a while, but like a couple years ago, or maybe last year, I don't know what time is at this point. Like former cast members came forward and said that she was horrible and abusive and occasionally kind of racist. So that was not good. And you know, so that is basically why she did not get cast as Fanny Brice in this show, or
um,
why people suspect she didn't. It
and
could be that they wanted to go a weird direction
she was
on
certainly more
purpose.
of a name. I mean, there was like a period of
Yes.
where a lot of I mean, and especially
Yeah.
now, given how West Side Story was an Oscar-winning
Yeah.
opportunity, there was a lot of cases where I think with Wicked as well, it was kind of like 2 or 3 years ago, you would have been like, oh, this is the obvious from the lady who was on Glee and it was big. And there was a lot of senses of where obviously she would do this and then she would do that, right? And then she didn't get these opportunities. You can imagine it's kind of would be frustrating for her. Um, I thought I thought that would be decent casting in the sense that, and this is somewhat controversial, it's my own opinion, but the idea for
Hmm.
me is like for friends of mine who were Jewish, who liked Streisand,
Hmm.
specifically, there was a kind of specific Jewishness about the part in the sense that when
Well,
people are
yeah.
saying that Barbra Streisand is not a pretty, like in Miss Atlantic City, or if they were to say that to Lea Michele, it is someone who's presenting otherwise, as Barbra Streisand did, as conventionally attractive, Hollywood attractive. The only thing that's saying that you are not Hollywood attractive, or like Jane Fonda, who was a contemporary of Streisand's, is
Hmm.
obviously certain physical traits that are associated with your ethnicity.
Yeah.
So like if for a black woman, it's like, oh, your hips or your specific traits, and
Hmm.
the casting they went with, and again, trading lightly on that, and again, these are friends of mine who were Jewish, I said like it is wound up being a sort of broader thing, not specifically the Judaism, but more of a sense of she's a woman of size, which is something anyone can identify if you're Irish or whatever, as opposed to being specifically her Judaism.
Oh, that's I did not hear that take at all. You know, I actually do think that Beanie Feldstein looks more like Fanny Brice, like by a lot. And frankly, she sings more like Fanny Brice, who I was heartbroken to be told by my mom when I was, I think, 7 years old, that Fanny Brice could not actually sing. And I cried. Like I was devastated by it. Well, she could sing, but it wasn't like, you know, Barbra Streisand singing. So, because I had in my head that she was like the best singer who ever lived, probably. And I was like, why don't we have any of her records? Because we had, you know, a lot of old records in general. And my mom was like, she was not actually Barbra Streisand, as it turns out. So, and a certain one's more faithful. It's probably less. You know who Fanny Brice's daughter's original choice to play her was, right?
Yeah, who?
Fanny Brice's actual daughter, her original choice to play Fanny Brice was Mary Martin, who is very much not Jewish looking.
She played Peter Pan for those who and she was in Sound of Music, if I recall correctly. So
on Broadway, not the version with
I mean, bluntly put, does anyone in 2022 give a crap about Fanny Brice or know who she is? Like, in fact, the play literally premiered on Barbra Streisand's birthday, like
80th birthday.
Yeah,
which felt a little rude to me, frankly.
But I mean, that just reinforces that it's not necessarily that Barbra Streisand was playing this. It's just more of like this funny girl is part of Barbra Streisand's story. Barbra Streisand is an American icon. So it's almost like it's not about Fanny Brice anymore. It's about like if someone wants to make a musical about the career of Barbra Streisand, that would be part of it, right? But like not it's a reprising this thing about Fanny Brice that audiences are. That's often my issue with.
I mean, the thing is,
why are you
Funny
doing
Girl in so many ways? Like, yes, they had, you know, already gotten the musical together and everything before she was brought on board. Trying to think of what she was in at the time that they saw her, and it was just like some sort of I Can Get It For You wholesale. So she was doing that off Broadway at the time. They had originally wanted, you know, possibly Mary Martin, but I think Garson Cannon, who was directing it, who was married to our friend Ruth Gordon, and who was also perfect in every way, much like Barbra Streisand. Like, he was like, no, she has to be like more an actual Jewish person. And they had wanted someone more established to begin with. Like, they were looking at Carol Burnett, all these other people. And they found Barbara and kind of plucked her out of obscurity for this role. However, like, the reason why a lot of songs stayed in the musical and weren't cut, like they originally wanted to cut People, but she had already cut it as a single before the play had premiered. So they were like, well, guess we got to keep People in this show. They, like, so much of the show is built around Barbra Streisand having a fucking amazing voice.
Oh yeah, and
like,
this is the
so much of it doesn't really work without that.
And those are the days where things become pop culture, like People became a single. It's almost like, which Hamilton was sort of, I would say, to be that big of like, this is now a #1 song or something like that. And Carol Burnett would have been great. Carol Burnett, I'm a huge fan of.
Yeah, me too.
She doesn't need to sing great. She's funny. She can do the vaudeville stuff.
Yeah. And the thing is, there are some roles where it's fine that someone can't sing fabulously. But I always bring up Roxy Hart as an example of this, because that's why they have like all like random people being cycled as Roxy Harts.
Yes, they often don't always move well. That's the polite term in
Mhm.
Broadway. Like, okay, she's not a dancer, but she moves well. I heard
Yeah.
someone say that about and it shows. I remember when I was working Chicago front of house, and they brought in Mary Lou Henner to replace Anne Reinking, and they clearly made changes
Mhm.
to the dancing. There's like cartwheel to the end of Hot Honey Rag that
Mhm.
like, nah, nah, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
They had to adjustments too. But yeah, I mean, Funny Girl, and who can tell? You can't predict the past. Carol Burnett could have been brilliant when played. Whether or not that would become part of this legend. I mean, it's legendary because it gave birth to Barbra
Barbra
Streisand
Streisand.
world.
And
It's so
because she
strong.
sang so well.
And
And,
people
Beanie
that don't
Feldstein has
rate
a
on
nice voice,
yeah, but people
but
don't
it's
rate on
not like
Parade are part of the songbooks. They are like on Barbra Streisand greatest hits. It's not like you don't listen to people, you don't listen to Don't Rain on My Parade and think, oh, Barbra Streisand is performing, is doing a
a
good job.
version of the song.
Fanny Brice doing it. It's like, no, this is the Barbra Streisand song. Oh,
Yes.
she's in character as someone who from vaudeville who I don't particularly recall. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think the reviews had been polite about saying she's fine as Fanny Brice, but not a great singer, which is kind of like, okay, well,
Then what's the point?
what's
Like,
the point? I mean, obviously, Barbra Streisand again was 22 years old when this,
mhm,
and it's 1964, and the Ziegfeld Follies was really only like 50 years earlier. So that's like
mhm.
from the 70s. If we were to do a musical now set in Woodstock, there's still some sort of cultural, it's
Yeah.
still kind of like, but people kind of get it. Like, oh
I
my
was very upset when my parents told me I could not be in the Ziegfeld Follies.
it doesn't exist anymore. But yes,
Yeah, no, I had dreams.
it's so I think as a show, I've always had and I felt this way about West Side Story as well, specifically West Side Story, which
Mhm.
was never a period. It was literally, hey, let's do Romeo and Juliet in the
Yes.
modern day with modern day concerns. And so those actors are playing essentially people their own age from their own generation. And so
Yeah.
now, 60 years later, these actors are playing like literally their grandparents and trying to get into that mindset. And I think it makes it a very different type of production. And so I think audiences will sort of be like, well, what am I seeing? How am I supposed to connect to this? How's this story? It's not to me, Funny Girl was never like Gypsy or My Fair
Yeah.
Lady, shows that I think can endure beyond um the the original leading lady. I likened it on Twitter to Purple Rain, perhaps
Yeah. No,
which is
I get it. Yeah.
it's like, that did very well. There's some
It would
great,
be weird if someone were to like, let's remake Purple Rain.
well, especially to remake it, and it's like, well, that person does a great performance as the kid. It really gets the heart
Yeah.
of the kid, but is not a great singer and dancer. And I was like, well, okay, you got what the point of that
It's
was,
like
right?
I feel like Beanie Feldstein is a very likable person. I think that she's good in the things that she is in. I felt like ultimately when they first cast it, I was like, oh, this is fucking cruel. Like to because I heard her sing and I was like, she's fine, but she's like, she would be great in Into the Woods. That would be super, something like that. Maybe like some more Sondheim type stuff, not
So
like a big like show-stopping,
you don't
belting voice.
so you don't think this will be like West Side Story was?
No, I do not.
It's not going to be.
No, I think that we're everyone's just gonna try and forget that this ever happened. I think it's gonna be a little bit more like Rebecca the musical, which I
Uh,
had such high hopes for because I love Rebecca.
oh, the film, yes, it's
Yeah,
wonderful. It's one of those Hitchcock. I mean, here's my favorites of his, and here's my favorites that you probably don't know that he did or were shot that he did.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and I'm sure we'll wind our ways back to school theater, but something you were also watching a lot of X-Files repeats
Yes.
recently. And
Yes, because I took yesterday off because I needed like some mental health time. So I was like, I will have a 3-day weekend. It'll be great. And so yesterday I spent the whole day just like chilling out and watching old X-Files episodes. And I was on season 3. And I like the first 2 episodes of season 3, I think, are basically the entire anti-vax playbook. Like it's everything. Because I mean, we were discussing this. Like when I rewatch X-Files, I don't usually bother with the mythology episodes because they're not I just don't care. I like the Monster of the Week episodes. I feel like the mythology ones get like kind of boring after a while, quite frankly. Never really cared for those to begin with, honestly. But like I can't believe I totally forgot all about like the smallpox vaccine stuff, you know, being involved in creating alien human hybrids, which some people think about the vaccine, and Scully getting a microchip in her neck, which is, you know, people think the vaccines are causing microchips. And it occurred to me like, oh my God, the people who came up with this shit very obviously cribbed some of their nonsense from the X-Files.
The chip they put in her in that episode, because at this point she's had lost her job, or one of many times it looks like she's going to lose her job, and she has to go through the front door, you know, and so the metal detector goes off because the alien conspiracy never thought that she might ever like go on a plane or do like essentially it like, well, don't you have technology that would not it was one of those things where I remember my mother, which was why I was a big fan of the show, and that was one of the things that she was just like, this is dumb. Like that is not how they found it. She was like, I reject how this happened. Like
it was, but they tried to like push it like, oh, this thing has a hair trigger. It's a very special like, metal detector.
Forgotten about that and forgotten the hair. We like someone's like, can you fix this? It's really dumb. I'm not gonna rewrite the scene to have it say something about a hair trigger. And the vaccine is supposed to be like they were going to unleash bees that would inject, and you'd have the vaccine. There was all these things. And
also,
later,
hold on, wait. I just realized something. How often do they probably have to travel by plane prior to this point? They would have had to go, like, I think even back then they had like metal detectors that you had to go through.
There were some. I mean,
it wasn't a lot.
I'm in my 40s now. For anyone like pre-traveled, pre-9/11, you think about it, it just feels like you kind of left your house 20 minutes before the flight and you kind of just rolled in. It was like the bus, but now, and later in the 3rd season of X-Files, there is one of my favorite episodes, Jose Chung's from Outer Space.
Oh yeah.
Where it's even pretty much stated that the conspiracy is meant to be so batshit.
Yeah.
Deliberately insane, so that if you were to explain they're going to do this, then they're going to do that, and that's this, they're going to laugh you at it because you just sound crazy.
Which is also what the people say. Like that's like literally what these people also say. They're like, oh, they make it ridiculous. They, you know, put things in shows like the X-Files 30 years ago so that people today are like, oh, you got that from the X-Files, and it's all then we sound crazy for saying that the vaccines are full of microchips.
So they
meant
don't
to control us.
Enough self-awareness to realize of how absurd all that is. I mean, we've talked about that. I mean, because Mulder is correct as opposed to being crazy. And Scully is usually wrong, but in reality, like I remember I described myself as a Scully, and maybe it was even Rebecca. It's like, well, you know, Scully really? It's like, well, yes, because she's like her. Generally speaking, she's like, oh, this person lost all their blood. Here's like 50,000 logical explanations for this, and then Mulder's like vampire. Okay, well, here's all the rational lot, and then of course he gets to be correct because
Yeah.
it's a TV show where someone's insane presumptions are actually true.
Yeah.
But that became this sort of thing of like people want to be big conspiracy theorists. You'd probably never seen, there was a Justice League cartoon where there's a character called the Question, and he was created by Steve Ditko, who was a big objectivist. He co-created Spider-Man, and the Question was also very much a big conspiracy theorist. And at the time, it's like, and of course, he's right. There is a huge conspiracy of
Yeah.
people running things and sort of Illuminati. Um, what I had in a tweet to you was like, it's interesting how, in a way, how apolitical the X-Files was. It was just a general, the government is bad, though arguably that's not apolitical because belief in government and the ability of government to do anything is inherently somewhat progressive. Because kind of like we want to believe that we can,
I would argue, yeah.
believe that the government can implement policies correctly. I think Republicans have benefited from a lot of post Watergate cynicism that the government can't do anything other than like blow things up,
Yeah.
kill people.
I think that they actually have like historically way more trust in the government in terms of like, hey, we're going to go bomb this country. We have, great reasons for that. Republicans generally have had more actual trust in the government, just not in the government doing good things. And it's not that they don't think doing good things will work. It's that they're more afraid that they will work.
Well, yes. I mean,
they don't want those things to work because they want their money. Like, it's not.
Yes, the perception of any sort of good, anyone trying to do anything positive is inherently sinister or motivated.
Yeah.
So
I mean, they're the ones always going on about oh my God. COINTELPRO and everything. But COINTELPRO was like investigating leftists. That's who they were. They were not investigating Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was having other people investigated it. To some degree, I think they, looked at the KKK a little bit, but they were primarily concerned with like the Black Panthers, the Yippies, like all those other people than they were with, anyone else. And they're the ones always trying to like claim to this day, like, oh no, they're going to go and COINTELPRO us. No, they're not. That was your shit. Like, you're the ones who did that. You're the ones who did the Red Scare. Like, all of the bad things the government has done that they're supposedly afraid of were Republican things.
Yeah, and conservative, and they will all, but then they spin it. It's like, this is my witch hunt. It's like, well, dude, you would have been leading a witch hunt in the original days against women, which was a thing.
They're now also literally called for witch hunts.
And there's there's
actual witches.
And the lynchings and whatever, essentially everything they've done. But I guess it's rooted in a sense of fear of others doing to you. I mean, that's the X-Files. The any kind of alien invasion, colonization concept is rooted in American imperialism. The fear of like these people are going to come, and I mean, if you look at what happened to imperialism in America, like what they did to native tribes, what they did at exploitation or whatever, is very true. And so even a film as absurd as Independence Day, when they find the alien and the alien is like, look, what is there any peace or any whatever? It's like, no peace. We're just going to come strip everything you guys have and slaughter you all. And that seems like, oh, they're unreasoning monsters. But from kind of what the West did, that's how it was. We're going to come because there's no reasoning. It's kind of like, well, if
we wanted to do that, so does everyone else.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was always kind of the fear. I mean, X-Files, it was interesting because it aired during the most of the time during the Clinton administration. And some guy was very obnoxious. It was just like, oh, well, obviously they didn't address politics. They didn't want to alienate half their. It's like, yeah, I get it. It's like, I I'm just stating it's interesting to watch, to see how apolitical it is. I comprehend that people make choices based on wanting a rating share or whatever. It's always like, there's certain type of men who will respond, like they will respond to articles of mine and they haven't read the whole thing. They'll just say, like, in it's like, oh well, no, this is what, well, I go into that in the second paragraph. Just wait, just read the whole thing, and then you can have your opinion. No one's going to take your opinion away from you.
Yeah.
But with the X-Files was the idea of like the politics of it. It was more of just there's a government conspiracy. There was no sense of who was in charge could impact, like, would Mulder lose his job? The FBI director changed because the FBI director was certainly kind of a liberal, but it changed of like, it's kind of embarrassing that there's a crazy guy investigating aliens and wants to get reelected. Well, this pressure, there was just a general sense of this is embarrassing to the government, but not like who the government is. I mean, there was like a general flashback where the villain on the show, the cigarette smoking man, had killed JFK and MLK and others, and he actually felt bad about MLK, but JFK was like, yeah. But other than that, did not.
You read over so much more of the show than I do.
Yes, Wasted Friday. It was on Friday nights, sort of like one of those shows where they used to show kind of like Star Trek Next Generation was on Saturday nights. It was literally, they would just say, look, we know you're not dating. This is for you.
See, I only got to watch it every once in a while when it was first on because my sister had to watch TGIF. I did not. I wasn't watching Sabrina the Teenage Witch. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yes, that was also. I think I later saw that through repeats and so forth. But yeah, I mean it
holds up.
Oh yeah, Melissa Joan Hart, despite I think she's welcome to her politics or whatever. It's just, but I think she was actually very funny. There's a YouTube of her watching the new Sabrina with like one of her castmates and being like, not a jerk about it, but like, oh my god, like, because it's hardcore, the new Sabrina.
Yeah, no, it scared the crap out of my sister. She couldn't stop, and that's not me projecting. It actually did scare her.
It is scary.
Actually, Clarissa Explains It All was an early inspiration of mine, fashion-wise. So
it was great. I remember that show as well.
Yeah. And when we moved, all I wanted was a window seat so that I could have like some dude climbing up in my room, because I was like, this is what I want. And so every place that we went to go look at for houses, I was like, I want a window seat that can like hypothetically be reached by ladder, because apparently I didn't care about being murdered so much as I just wanted like a cute boy popping in my room all the time.
It's a dangerous thing. No, I mean, I don't know if you can reach the answer. I mean, the folks who are that kind of paranoid and believe all this stuff that's dramatically absurd, but we need to recognize that they are growing in strength. Like what they believe is much more mainstream. Like and you used to write a lot about the QAnon stuff. I mean, the QAnon rhetoric is now mainstream rhetoric, whereas now, like Marjorie Green will be like, "Oh, I don't believe QAnon," and the media will take her out as her word, and then she'll launch into QAnon spiel, which is just like, well, no, you that is.
Well, because here's the thing. Here's the trick that according to the QAnon people, they say there is Q, there are anons, there is no QAnon. And that's like a direct quote from Q. And so therefore anything, like anytime Marjorie Taylor Greene or someone is like, no, I don't believe in QAnon, they're like winking at the idea that, they're like, no, I don't believe in QAnon. If they ask me if I believe in Q, maybe.
And she went after the Catholic Church and did a whole diatribe against them. And I've mentioned, obviously, that I went to school with Marjorie Green. We were the same college. But the reason I mention that again is because literally, I swear, freshman year, like sometime 1992, I'm I'm eating in lunch. A a white student fellow sits down in front of me and starts like going on rambling about the Catholic Church, how evil it is. I think she
Yeah.
grabbed something of mine, criticizing something, and she was like, "Yes, well, you understand." And then she kept going on, "They're wicked, they're whatever," and it literally
Yeah.
was the same rant. I think that was her. No, I mean,
Oh my God.
but it was just one of those things. It's
That's
like, oh my god,
spooky.
that is
Like,
really.
and
That
her
is
hand was attached to the door when you looked at it.
and I do, and not all levity, it's just like this anti-Catholic stuff I've heard.
Oh yeah, it's a huge thing.
But like this is now stuff that you just say. It's not. I mean, Ron DeSantis is like ranting about Disney and about how used to be safe to sit your kids in front of Disney, and he's younger than I am. It's like, well, what world are you remembering? Also, conservatives used to. I mean, when I was a kid, there was like after school, they still before Ted Turner kind of was a controversy because Ted Turner came and changed a lot of the old Tom and Jerry cartoons. They used to be like incredibly racist.
Yeah.
Like after school, I was sitting and watching like Mammy Two Shoes and her hot jazz concert. So you're familiar with the character Mammy Two Shoes?
I am not.
So
I am really not. I think I know of someone called Vinny Two Shoes, but I don't.
No. This was not. She was a mammy. She was not. So she was, I guess, the mammy in the house where Tom lived, and she would only be seen from like the waist down. She was a huge, that stereotype and the
like Nana on the Muppet Babies in my personal frame preference. Yeah,
but a large black, like the mammy stereotype, and she was speaking in English, was whatever, and was very upset that Tom couldn't kill Jerry, and then Jerry would go and try to scare Mammy and stuff like it. Man, that was like you sit home and you would watch it and you'd feel, and he's like, well, that was funny, but somehow I feel like I hate myself. I was like, if you're a black child, you'd be like, what?
Yeah, no, I would imagine. I never really watched Tom and Jerry, so like I understand the premise.
There was like tons of old, because a lot of minstrel humor was big. So you like a list of race. Like one guy did a whole list of these cartoons, and my favorite was there's His Mouse Friday, which is Jerry's in blackface the whole time, and the guy's like, this might possibly be the most racist Tom and Jerry cartoon, but one of the Mammy Two Shoes episodes involves where she goes to a hot jazz night. So it's like her and some other black people and stereotypes dancing and having fun. And Jerry and Tom get into a full fight. She has to come running home. And she's like, that damn cat ruined my evening. She's very upset, a very pseudo voice. And later, I just recalled that was one of the cartoons that was re-edited when Ted Turner came over and produced on TNT or TBS.
Mm-hmm.
And so Mammy Two Shoes for a while was completely redrawn by suddenly a skinny white woman. So you see a skinny white woman's legs, and because the fact that she was fat was the problem. And she's skinny white lady, and she's no longer, obviously her voice, she speaks, it's an Irish woman. And it's just not funny. It's like a weird, you're like almost missing the racist humor because she's just like, it is not hot jazz. They're like sitting around drinking tea. It's a very way. It's just like, oh, that dawn cat ruined my evening. It's like, what? Like, what am I? This is not funny. It's not even. Can't you replace this with another? Can't you find if isn't there no inherent humor here?
They're like, I know Irish people.
Yes.
They're also sometimes maids in things.
Yes, that was sort of often a. I think there are some, whether it's like the wisecracking Irish maid instead of the sassy black maid.
Yeah.
A lot of films, and you offer kind of like, man, I hope there was a sassy Irish maid in this film so I can see it again. because of the sassy
Yeah.
black shade would be like, cut or edited. So that was what was on. And when they were changed, Ted
Mhm.
Turner was like, conservatives hated Ted Turner for doing this. And
Yeah.
so, but we all get this, right? Conservatives are just like, what I mean is, I'm fine with my kid watching horribly
Yeah.
violent, racist cartoons.
Because
I
yeah.
just don't want them to see, gay people as human beings, or somehow that is somehow conditioning them.
I mean, the idea that people didn't have to explain cartoons to their kids or like care about what their kids were watching is, maybe that only applied to them, but there were a lot of things that my mom either had to explain to me and like be like, hey, this is not okay for this reason, or, this is not what happened with Pocahontas, even sort of. Or, even like Mary Martin, Peter Pan had to have some explaining there as well. The blonde tiger lily and what have you. Like that was not good. My parents did have to explain that to me. Not just the fact that she was blonde, but I wasn't allowed to watch cartoons that had excessive violence. I wasn't allowed to watch or even violence at all. I couldn't watch the Ninja Turtles. I couldn't watch He-Man. I couldn't watch G.I. Joe because that was, both violent and like gay military industrial complex and war. That's good. There were a lot of things I couldn't watch. I think the only cartoons I did watch were Rainbow Bright and Jem.
Oh, I love Jem.
Yeah. Jem also holds up, by the way. It is actually compelling to watch as an adult. And however, the Misfits, their songs are indeed better.
Their songs are better.
They weren't lying. They are not lying in that theme song. Their songs are better.
Wasn't there supposed to be a Jem and the Holograms like movie? Did that
Oh,
actually
there was. It was terrible.
Oh, so it happened and it was bad. It was like one of those things.
Yeah.
Was like, oh, well, this won't be very good, will it? And then it's was not.
I was very upset about it when they first announced it. I was like, no, you leave Jem alone. And there weren't even actual holograms or something like that. Like, it was some bullshit. Also, a live action Jem like makes no sense at all. Because again, Jem is a hologram. If there was like a live person who had like a hologram like somehow imposed on them, you would notice because holograms are see-through. Like no one would buy that.
Well, like the holodeck on Star Trek, right? Like, that was somewhat real, like kind of like fake. They could somehow make it, but they didn't. But yeah, I feel like they're doing a Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers movie, John Mulaney and I think Andy Samberg, and it's just looks absurd. Like, okay, I don't.
Every guy I knew growing up totally had a crush on Gadget, the little like mouse lady.
I think so. It was always very confused. There was the Heathcliff cartoon, and Heathcliff's girlfriend was like sort of a cat, but like one of the cats from Cats, because it was like, she was like a human, like hourglass. It was wearing leg warmers. It was like, what are you doing? And maybe that's DeSantis probably is confused having watched that, and probably being like, I'm aroused by this cartoon cat. Got like a body like Cleo. What's the cat's name? And then yes, Gadget was kind of cute, tomboyish, but a mouse. It's a mouse. What on similar to Alvin and the Chipmunks, where
the Chipettes.
Well, they introduced the Chipettes because the first season, like the Chipmunks are going to school and they're dating normal like human girls. It's very weird, right? Like, are they chipmunks or not? They're not like what is happening? So I think someone came in and like, can we just create the Chipettes where they will be kind of, female versions of each chipmunk type. So there's.
I mean, I respect the fact that everyone on that show was like, yeah, no, they're chipmunks. That's fine. They talk and sing, and are chipmunks. Come date my daughter, young chipmunk.
Yes. there was a time where people did not want me dating their daughter, and they were okay with the chipmunk. It's like, oh, like, he's a nice chipmunk, but this guy, like, who cares? Yeah. So,
Also, gummy bears. I'm sorry. I have every cartoon conversation. I do have to bring up the existence of gummy bears, which made no fucking sense. They were just making juice, and for some reason, lived in it's like they lived in medieval times, and they made juice that made them bounce, and that was their big superpower. I still have so many fucking questions about that.
Yeah. Michael Mora, a colleague, he had shared with us. There was a period of where during the 80s they would make cartoons based on incredibly violent R-rated movies. It was like a RoboCop.
Oh yeah,
cartoon,
yeah.
Rambo cartoon, and
Oh, I didn't know that.
I mean, granted, those films are inherently cartoonish, so you just kind of scale it back, and I guess it would work. But you wonder, like, well, who's the? It's just, I guess, who is this IP? These kids obviously never saw this, would have a chance to see this, but I guess it's just a free IP lying around. So let's just put it in there and see what happens.
I remember there were two different Ghostbusters shows. One that was like the original Ghostbusters, and then the real Ghostbusters, and one of them was based off of the movie, and the other one was like one that existed beforehand. But I think by then I'd probably seen Ghostbusters.
The real Ghostbusters.
Yeah, because I was allowed to watch that, I think, like when it first came out.
The original,
but I don't. Yeah.
Was that PG or PG-13 or R? Was it?
Yeah,
R?
I think like you weren't supposed to watch it. I was allowed to watch anything, as long I was allowed to read anything, period, and I was allowed to watch anything except for like violent shit. So like I couldn't watch like violent, shows like cartoons, Power Rangers, whatever. But like Henry and June, totally fine.
I had an adult
9.5 weeks. Go right ahead.
So I had a adult library card. Just meant that I, in theory, was advanced and could read any, but what that resulted in was reading a lot of Stephen King and VC.
Oh, I read all of Stephen King
when I was like 12, and being like, oh my God, like VC Andrews especially was like, this woman is not well, but brilliantly so. Like her mind is very
yeah. I also read all the VC Andrews in middle school. That's like really the time for VC Andrews, I would say. But like, they weren't they're not freaking out about that. Or like, like, oh no, kids are going to read about incest and then go try it. And maybe they were at the time, but I don't think so.
Well, there was something interesting I saw, which is it's a challenge for Democrats, which is that individually, so in a town, so people will be, I was like, well, are you concerned that your teacher, that you're sending your kids to a school where they're pedophiles? No, my school is great. I've met my teachers. They're great. And the problem with all kind of right-leaning people is that, but they're still overall, all teachers are pedophiles. But the ones I know and met aren't pedophiles. So you can't break through. I mean, that's the challenge. It's like kind of the after-school special thing with bigots was usually that bigots come into town and they don't like the black family. The black family introduces himself and they're nice. And it's like, oh, okay, well, we'll be less bigots, but just for that family. And so there's still this perception that the school, they've done such a number, Republicans have done such a number. And you weren't working, so you didn't cover this, but someone was writing at Wonkette about, I think they're targeting public schools in general, like Kennedy from MTV was host on Fox talking about we need to just get rid of public schools in general.
Well, that's been the long game for a long ass time now. Like that, they have really want to get rid of public schools because public schools are socialism. They also want to get rid of libraries because libraries are socialism. So like, what two things are they attacking right now? Public schools and libraries.
And they've just done a very effective, evil job at it. Whereas we've, even, after George Floyd, Democrats in the same position of, can we just throw more money at cops? Can we give them more money and fund them more so that we look like we like cops. It's like, even though they did a look at the Minneapolis police department, it was terrible. Like, just again, similar to Ferguson, where they just how they treat black people, and nothing changed. I mean, Democrats can never, and even in the 90s, 2 years after Rodney King, the reaction is the crime bill. So generally speaking, there is a response to police brutality, and by 2 years, Democrats have folded. Like, can we give you more money and do something more with crime? And I mean, it's
Because we don't want to look soft on crime, because the Republicans will punish us.
Yeah,
in some way that they're not already doing.
It's unfortunate. I mean, and there was some good news about potentially some student loan relief. I had often been not resistant, but kind of like, if I just didn't trust that Democrats could message this at all well. And generally speaking, that I said, well, here's what's going to happen. Despite all the data, Republicans will come out and say, oh, you are gonna, give away tax, reduce the debt, make life better for entitled rich white kids who took interpretive dance and useless degrees, et cetera, and all these hardworking, non-college educated people, most of whom in your demographic you're ignoring, and and Democrats would be like, and that's pretty much what happened. I'm seeing people parrot this, and they're Democrats. I'm like, well, this is all untrue. I mean, there's clear data that most people carry the most debt are women, specifically women of color. Like, you don't have income inequality and have the most people debt for their schools being white, like, that doesn't even make sense. And also, if we're talking about a potential giveaway for rich, well-off white people, Republicans love that. So so
here's the thing: they're trying to do a "you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't." Like, it's a trick game that you basically, what they're saying is, or what they're trying to do is, okay, well, if you make public colleges and community colleges free, then how is that fair to the people who have student loans now and paid out the ass for those things before? And then if you try and do the get rid of the student loans first, they're like, well, that's not fair to people who didn't go to school, or for kids who are going to school now. How does that help change things? And they're trying to basically put everyone in a position where it's like, oh, no matter which way you start doing this or which way you attack it, it's the bad thing.
Yeah.
And the fact is, like, the actual truth is, they just don't want it.
Yeah, but
they just literally do not want it, and they don't want to come out and say, we don't want it.
But the Democrats making this argument is a Republican talking point. It's like, you might as well say the same thing about welfare. Like, well, I worked hard and paid for why should my tax dollars go to poor people who don't have milk? Like, it's the same argument. Like, everyone makes a decision, and the idea of those are, you worked hard and paid off your loans, either because you happen to be in a industry that didn't collapse in the past 30 years, or and you could have worked hard. Let's say I worked hard, but a lot of it's luck. And also, I went to University of Georgia. I was out of state, but and I'm not a genius, so I say this. So whatever scholarships I was eligible for, and whatever benefits my parents
I
helped.
think you're a genius, Stephen.
Thank you. Whatever loans I took, I graduated. My monthly was about $50, maybe $75, I think 50. So literally a cell phone payment, if cell phones were widely available in 1996. But it's like that's doable. Now, it was 10, tuition for out of state has tripled since I was. But entry level journalism jobs, to the extent that they exist, but anything in publishing, has not tripled. So and it's, college has gotten significantly more expensive. And I've seen some folks on Twitter, like, again, so-called Democrats saying because look, we knew Republicans would hate this. But this is Democrats, like, well, you don't have to take these degrees, you don't have to do these things. So, well, okay, what are these other fields? And it's often ableist response. Well, you could get into construction, plumbing, carpentry, and it's like, okay, well, not everyone can do those things. Specifically, those professions that are often predominantly held by men or people who
Yeah.
feel capable. And if everyone started doing them, if the supply increased, the wages would also decrease. And don't you want well educated? Like, it's not
Well,
efficient.
that's the thing. Like, we all benefit from other people going to college.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Well educated people doing what they are skilled to do, even. And like the fact that Democrats can't leap on this and say, conservatives for the past for decades have claimed that there's too much wokeness in in
mhm.
academics, too much wokeness in media is too liberal, and all of these things. It's like, and then now they claim that the humanities is some worthless degree, but they also believe that humanities have this tremendous impact on society, so they should want as many people to be
Oh,
able
that's
to do what
good.
they want, but they don't believe. Like, it's not a hard argument to make,
Yeah.
but like, Democrats just leave it on the table and just be like, yeah, maybe you should get in those fields. It's like, and the problem is like Republicans actually come off better saying, well, not everyone needs to go to college and whatever, because you've got Lauren Boebert, right? Republicans are
Mhm.
at least walking the walk. Here's our, granted, a there is no AOC who didn't go to college. There's no woman of color who didn't
Yeah.
go to college and it's going to wind up anyone voting for her for anything. But fine. But Democrats don't have that, right? It's like, here's all of our Ivy League, well off,
Mhm.
very well, but like you should be a plumber. What?
Yeah.
Like that seems like a fuck you, right? And when it happened during you're mooning over Pete Buttigieg with his,
Mhm.
8 languages and all his degrees, but it's like not everyone needs to go to college. Okay, well, which candidate are you supporting who, you know, most people's lawns and has that that's a
Yeah.
great that's an important business. That's important. I highly support that. But where's that candidate on the stage? Where are you elevating these people? What about your own family? So in
Well, I
close,
mean, I think in general, Democrats get very anxious around the idea of more working class candidates because they find they're afraid that they're going to be unpredictable.
mhm.
So like whenever there are like, working class type candidates, they're like, no, they're evil, secretly evil in some way that we can't totally explain. They voted for Bernie Sanders. And then everyone's like, oh, okay, we get it. And,
Yeah, I mean that's been the original sin of the challenge of Sanders and with Trump was to say we disagree with these guys. In Trump's case, he's effing evil, but anything they did well,
mhm,
us discount. So Trump's command at rallies, all rallies are bad. It doesn't matter if you're good at a rally. You need to, his success at that, his success at connecting, because he legitimately did, to the point that people are
mhm,
just dismiss that as a cult. While having your own cult, that's not as good for certain politicians. And
yeah,
then um, with Sanders, it was like, oh well, we don't like populism or working classness, or we don't like um, any, young people don't vote, and who cares about young people, which is just maddening. Like, even one, they've had this with the debate about the student loans. It's like, well, young people, why are we supporting, young people won't turn out for us. It's like, okay, well, it's a couple things here. Most the people experiencing the most of the student loan debts between the ages of 30 and 44, logically. And you're
mhm,
talking about 18 to 25-year-olds not voting. But even so, if you're a party that's supposed to be about young people, you want to turn out, that's your base. Republicans are living for their base. Also, 18, 25-year-olds, as I think, unfortunately, we're both evidence of, people within that age group get older.
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
and if
No,
you
and
don't,
it makes sense. I
never.
feel like Democrats think that having young people vote for them is an image problem to some degree. Like they're like, oh no, like we don't actually want to encourage that or look like we're encouraging that because young people, we want to look like we're, going after like the middle-aged people in the suburbs. Like that's what we want to project, the people who are already successful. And also young people will have expectations, and we don't really want to have to deal with that.
And it's just weird. And I mean, again, and it's less about politics because we can talk about Clinton's politics
Yeah.
or whatever, but a lot of these folks who are dismissing young voters who are around my age, the first person I voted for was Bill Clinton. And that whole thing was youth. He was rock the vote. There was
Yes.
like, don't talk about the appearance of young people were excited, about this.
Mhm.
Same with Obama, whatever. So, they would talk about, and say it was that way with Kennedy for periods where young people would get these people decades later, if you talk about what got them in politics, it was about believing and being excited about a politician at one point. That's what got them into it. And to be in a sense of like, that somehow it's like, let's just ignore those voters and everyone will magically think that Democrats are wonderful when they're 45. It's like, well, what if you've ignored them? They will either go to a very youth-centric, I mean, it's scary because we talk about youth, fascism has a lot of youth movements. And so Green is young, like compared to, a lot of Democrats. So 47 is young. So Green, Bobart, Getz, like this youth movement that they're getting young white voters, even some young POC voters. And also you risk just voters tuning out. And so never coming back at 45.
I think there's to some degree like a certain sense of betrayal, like with Democrats and young voters because, again, a lot of young people voted for Bernie Sanders. And so there's like a sense of, well, fuck you then, stay away from us. You're like, that officially means that you're bad and evil and should not have any, should not be voting for us anyway. We'd rather you go vote Republican because you betrayed us so deeply. And I think that's a very, that's, kind of part of it.
And sort of the cred. It's like, well, I was a real progressive. AOC is not a real progressive. And it winds up, and I see this a lot in Hollywood. So it's kind of like, oh, well, I'm going to date myself. Courtney Love thinks she's all hip and cool, but Madonna was a true trend breaker. It's like, well, that was a decade ago.
Or Kat Bieland. The actual argument would have gone.
Which artist you say again? I'm sorry.
Kat Bieland of Babes in Toyland. There was like a whole giant thing because Courtney Love was accused of stealing the Kinder whore look from Kat Bieland. And there was like a big fight at Lollapalooza and everything. Granted, I am like, this is like before my time, but I'm aware of it happening.
Before your time.
Well, like, I mean, I was like 11. Like, I mean, I wasn't going to Lollapalooza. Like,
I might have been there. So you just mock me with your youth. But yes, but yes.
I was not allowed to go to Lollapalooza in the 6th grade. I know I seem really cool, but no.
Yes, that was the one. That was legitimate. That was legitimate. Like, I don't think so.
Well, my parents had a fear of festival seating resulting, because of Altamont. Not that they were there, but like they were like, you can get trampled.
I would certainly agree with that. It's a dangerous thing. I mean, I think and Marty, known as Doc, had written about, Romney calling it bribes. I mean, this goes back to him in 2012, the idea of anything that Democrats do for the less fortunate is obviously bribing them, even though it can't possibly be for the good of the nation. It can't be that Republicans can always deliver for their voters. Like, it's the same thing. But yes, I always have found myself very disappointed by this response to what is potentially a positive of releasing the dead. I mean, it's obviously going to be better for the economy in general. Like, the idea of, even if you're a working class person who if people have more money to spend and aren't saddled in debt,
they can spend more money on your things that you are selling or on your plumbing services.
Yes, they will. Send on your plumbing services. Yeah. I mean, so we shall see. So what else do you have going on for, I guess we're going to the weekend, so this might already have happened It's very hard.
I know. I've got like not too much. I literally stayed off the internet pretty much entirely for 3 days. So I have very little idea of what's been going on. I did catch the weird anti-Catholic thing that we talked about earlier, but I think that was about it. The last thing that I wrote about on Friday, which is today for us, was Elon Musk's tweet about how he stayed the exact same for all of the years and the left moved on without him. And now he's on the right because he didn't change his opinion for a million years, which, like, you know, is exactly how you do become a conservative.
You just don't progress. Just sort
Yeah.
of like you know, the guy supporting Jim Crow
Yeah.
saying like, well, when I was a kid, I was like, we shouldn't, you know, why are we holding these people slaves? Let's just treat them as second-class citizens. That was been a fairly liberal position.
Yeah.
It is not liberal at the time, and he actually never was. He wasn't like Charlton Heston appearing with Halle Belafonte in the '60s and then the March on Washington. Like you know, Charlton Heston had some good, you know, racial justice stuff in the '60s, and then he kind of on guns, some other things shifted right again because people get more conservative as they get older. But Musk has always been kind of
only if they don't change their opinions. Like that's really like, you know, social progress happens, and if you're like, I'm going to stay right here where I am, then eventually, yes, you are going to be like on the right.
I just
like
always
that's just
I thought that I could always make fun of trans people and that this position and that gay people were this and women weren't gonna demand certain things. I mean, it's always been every shift, and I was very annoyed with West Wing presenting it this way because West Wing presented a character who had worked in the Bartlett White House and then suddenly shifted and started working for the Republican. It was presented, and that was the Republican narrative presented as being about national security, 9/11, and it was all like, no, if you look at what was happening, a lot of that was rooted in just overt misogyny, racism, like oh, I don't like brown people, or I don't like because Muslims are scary, and like things are just shifting. And so,
well, I mean, that was Dennis Miller's deal. Like, although I don't think he was ever that liberal to begin with, is the thing. Like,
no, and this happens a lot, right? It's like where perceived liberalism intersects with classism. So we look at a lot of his stuff, it's very classist. So making fun of Dan Quayle because Dan Quayle is quote unquote dumb, making fun of people because they're dumb can easily be veered into classism. And so when you have, I think you'd written about this a couple years ago. So when Don Lemon, who's liberal, and Rick Wilson, who's obviously conservative, are laughing at ignorant Trumpers and making fun of how they talk with their Southern accents, it's just fellow rich people making fun of poor people. And that's not sort of unity amongst the right and left. It's just there's always been rich people who want to make fun of people who are less fortunate. So I mean, that's where Musk is. I mean, I wrote about because Ben Shapiro had wanted Musk to come in and fire everyone on Twitter, right? Because he doesn't understand how anything works. How that's all. Most of how he wanted to fire people would have been illegal. You can't fire people in California for their political beliefs.
Which is what they say they want. The right says they want.
Well, I said like at will employment certainly exists. Talked about those issues with it, but you might as well just tell most conservatives at will employment isn't a thing because most of the reasons they want to fire someone is illegal. So it's kind of like, well, you could fire someone for any reason, but all these reasons, and they're kind of get pouty and like, those are all the I want to fire. Like, well, no, that's just you can't. And like he doesn't.
But it's okay because you can just say that you're firing them because you don't like their socks, and then that's
exactly. Like we're firing except Shapiro's such a genius. He presents as being like, just fire them because they won't. Essentially, prejudging that if someone is liberal, they are not going to follow Musk, which you can't do. Like you can fire me if I don't work, right? If I don't produce, if I don't make my deadlines, and if I, come in late, you can't preemptively fire me because, yeah, Black people are shiftless. It's like, well, no, that's discriminatory. You are assuming that I am going to do these things.
Mhm.
So, I mean, we'll see. I mean, Shapiro is someone, because he has his liberal tears mugs. He's someone who's existed on the corner of the internet but you can do that, right? But Twitter is this global corporation. You can't like piss off every liberal who exists. You can, and your face of your company, like Zuckerberg has problems, but most people know of Zuckerberg as the Facebook guy. So by the time you knew he was a sociopath, he was the Facebook guy. But Musk is like this Lex Luthor.
Like everyone knows that he's a sociopath from the beginning. Like,
yes, that's kind of not good for your face of your company. So we shall see. All right. Well, I will probably have to dart early now to go off to the plane. Wish me well. It's my first time
I
flying
do.
in years.
Oh, yeah, because they're not going to be wearing masks now, possibly. So
yeah, I'll wear a mask. I think no one on the flight, but I will wear a mask and maybe a helmet or something.
Yeah.
But
be careful.
Yes, thank you for filming this early with me, and best to you. I will see you soon. Bye-bye, everyone.